Hey, I'm Doug, and on behalf of everyone at Revv, it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the D20 Sound video series. Sadly, this is going to be the last video in the series for a while. We might come back and do some more sometime. So in the meantime, what we want to do is kind of, if you will, save the best for last, because what we're doing this time is we're wrapping the D20 in switchers. Now, this is the thing, is if you don't own a switcher, chances are, especially if you play live, you're very familiar with the pedalboard tap dance. It's having to step on a bunch of things simultaneously, get them turned on and turn it off when you need them to kind of hit your musical cues. The thing about a switcher, as you probably already knew, it enables you to switch a bunch of things simultaneously with the push of one button. So what I've done is I've mapped out what I like to think of as 4 on the floor: clean, overdrive, crunch, and lead. And you can just simply press one button and toggle between all of those. The other thing is you can also then jump into manual mode, where if I want to turn on loop 1, I can do that, or loop 2, or loop 3, or control the internal delay on the MS3. I can do all of that stuff. That is the sort of flexibility you get with a switcher. But most importantly, how does it sound? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull up the clean sound, and then I'm going to come back and tell you what it was that you were hearing. So the Boss MS3, first of all, is about $400. And what makes it different than a lot of the other switchers on the market is it's got built-in effects. And what you were hearing there was a combination of the built-in compressor and reverb, then going straight out into the front end of the D20. I was incorporating the power amp out as I was going direct out into Pro Tools, using the virtual model of the 112 open back cabinets that you see behind me. So the thing is that sound there is really the essence of the D20, but being able to, again, cloak that in some additional effects, it really just demonstrates how great a pedal platform, or in this case, a switcher pedal platform, this thing is. All right, with that said, let's move over to the overdrive sound. So in addition to being able to kind of just push one button and have things change all at once, one of the big benefits of a switcher like this is you can set up a bunch of, if you will, style-centric patches. And again, I like to go clean, overdrive, crunch, and lead for whatever gig you're doing. So for that one, I was incorporating my TS10 Tube Screamer along with some of the built-in reverb. Now we're going to step over onto, if you will, the style-appropriate crunch setting that I set up. Let's take a listen. Noting that Boss makes the ES8 an 8-loop switcher, there are certain disadvantages to using a switcher with 3 loops on it. However, one of the great things about this, in addition to having some great compressors and delays, is they've also got some great models of Boss's vintage DS1. And that particular sound was called Fat DS, and that's a sound that I love to go to. And if you will, that third gradation just before you get your lead tone, that's a really important sound to be able to step on. So in addition to hearing the Fat DS, you heard a little bit of slapback, and it's kind of getting ready to bust loose, which means, speaking of busting loose, let's take a listen to the lead tone. So that one was utilizing my much beloved Bogner Ecstasy Red pedal. In case you didn't know, Reinhold Bogner was one of the trusted few that actually worked on Eddie Van Halen's #1 Plexi Marshall. And in fact, although I wasn't using it on the face of this pedal, there's actually a Variac switcher, virtual Variac. In any case, the fact that we could go from such kind of Hendrix / Stevie Ray infused tones to Van Halen and a little kind of Eric Johnson and Joe Bonamassa infusion there speaks volumes to what kind of pedal platform the D20 is. In terms of the MS3, I was using something called the dual P delay. And I had to go into the owner's manual to figure out what a dual P delay is, dual parallel delay. But as I was in there reading, I was like, oh, snap, pretty much every Boss pedal you could ever want is inside this box, which means it's an extremely versatile piece of technology that does a great job. 3 loops may be less than you want, or it may be exactly what you need. Now, the next thing we're going to do is take a almost 180-degree different view on how you can use a switcher. This switcher here was primarily using external boxes, or largely using external boxes to kind of control what we were feeding to the D20, to the front end. This next rig is going to be using the 4-cable method, but we're going to be controlling all of that via MIDI using the Morningstar Mc6. So rather than using kind of a loop-based switcher, we're going to use a MIDI-based switcher, which has much the same result, where you can step on one button where multiple things happen, like, you're changing a patch and all the things inside that patch are changing. But also I've set up a bank that allows you, basically just like we did on the MS3, where you can go into basically manual mode and turn individual things on and off by targeting them, which is a really cool function. So with that said, let's check out the Morningstar Mc6. So that clean sound was the first of the next 4 on the floor settings, utilizing the Mc6 as the star of the show. This is a MIDI controller, and in addition to changing patches over here, take a look at what happens when I switch from clean to OD, then to chunk, and then to lead. When I hit the more button, I'm now going deeper. So this allows me to control inside here, if I want to turn the tube screamer on or off, or the DS1, or the delay, the reverb, I can do that inside an individual patch. So when we're just changing patches, that's program changes. But when we're changing things within a patch, turning individual blocks on and off, those are CC messages. And that is akin to what we did, kind of the 2 layers of what we did with the MS3. One is we're just changing patches, and then when we went into manual mode, we could choose what we were going to turn on and off and kind of operate like a traditional pedal board. And that's essentially what I'm doing there with the Morningstar Mc6. Pretty darn cool. All right, so the other thing that we're doing with this particular setup is the 4-cable method. But before we walk through that, let's take a listen to the next sound. As you might have imagined, that overdrive sound there was fueled by a tube screamer model inside the GT1000 core. Speaking of which, I want to walk through how I'm utilizing the routing to set up the 4-cable method. All right, technically, if you take a look there, you're only seeing 3 cables. Those are the 3 cables that connect the GT1000 core and the input on the Revv and the effects loop. The 4th cable would imply the one going into the GT1000 core, which there was no need to draw. All right, so send 1 on the back of the GT1000 core sends the signal from the core to the input of the D20. Looking at number 2 there, follow that little red line all the way down to the right. The send on the effects loop on the D20 sends the signal back to return 1 of that first loop on the GT1000 core. Then if you take a look at the red line next to the number 3, that is taking the send from the second loop on the GT1000 core to the return on the back of the D20. And that is the 4-cable method. It's really not that complicated, but it is, if you're not used to dealing with an effects loop and you're not used to the concept of there's certain types of effects that you want to place into the front end of the amp, like compressors and drive pedals, and then certain things you want to place in the effects loop, like reverbs, which is what you just heard there a moment ago, being able to wrap the amp like that with the 4-cable method is highly effective. All right, let's move on to the quote-unquote crunch clip. So that one was once again leveraging the DS1, or a model thereof, I should say, for crunch mode, which I like to think of as kind of this third gear. As I mentioned before, it's kind of like you're just getting ready to rev up for that solo. That's a really important sound in my universe. All right, now the interesting thing about that, and especially with this guitar, it sounded a little bit more like one of my favorite combinations of a tube screamer and a fuzz face stacked together, but it worked really well. Speaking of working really well, the thing that has continued to impress me over and over and over again is basically the D20, you just kind of, whatever you put into it and or into the effects loop, it just sounds great. It is a wonderful, wonderful pedal platform. All right, speaking of what you put into it and what you put in the effects loop, we're now going to go for this last lead clip, which is going to bring some delay. And this is kind of one of those situations where, yes, you could put everything into the front end of the amplifier, but I think you get a layer of fidelity when you start wrapping the amplifier by putting your compressors and your overdrives into the front end and your time-based effects like delays and reverbs in the loop. Let's take a listen to this clip, and we'll be back in just a moment. So the interesting thing about that clip was the amount of volume that was actually happening in the room when I played it. Really a very satisfying play, especially to get that kind of sustain and singing this out of a single coil instrument. Pretty amazing. All right, I want to take a moment and thank you for watching this video. This has not been a short endeavor, so if you're still watching, which I wouldn't be talking to you if you weren't, thanks so much for hanging out. If you're an existing D20 user, I hope that this has further illuminated your experience with an amazing amplifier. If you're kind of checking out the D20, you're obviously very serious about this. So let me just say this. I'd say of all the amps on the market, if you added kind of like all the pros that make a great amp great, I'd say this amp has more of them than any other amp on the market. Want me to be specific? Okay. 6v6 power tubes, the classic sound of the deluxe reverb. But unlike a deluxe reverb, got an effects loop. Then there's all the reactive load and the ability to incorporate or not incorporate the power amp when you're going direct out, 2 notes torpedo remote. That amount of control, not just on stage, but also in the studio, it's staggering. And most importantly, when I sit down, music pours out of this. In any case, want to thank you for checking out this video. Also want to thank my friends at Revv for having me along. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.